Hi, my name is Brian Venton and welcome to another opinion piece that I've called The Construct of Aboriginal Nationhood. The recent referendum held in Australia has got people thinking. For me, I've been thinking about the whole concept of nationhood and national sovereignty. Wikipedia describes a nation state as simply a large politically sovereign country or administrative territory. Now that's a useful definition, but you may not realise that nation states are essentially social constructs where people agree to be governed or are coerced to be governed in a certain way with a set of rules or laws that they live under. They are relatively fluid arrangements and can change over time. History clearly demonstrates that truth. Nations rise and fall, but as a general rule, they exist and survive depending on who the dominant people or influences are at any given point in time. Their fluid nature and how they are formed and change over time shouldn't be lost to us. All cultures, indigenous or otherwise, are subject to this changing process. And I suggest that even our recent referendum in Australia to enshrine an Aboriginal voice in our constitution was essentially an attempt to refashion our Australian nation. Many Australians recognised this and rejected the proposal outright. Now, if I'm right in suggesting that all nation states the world over, in their various forms throughout history, including Aboriginal tribal nations, are actually social constructs, what makes some structures better than others to live under? Do we want to live under, for example, a communist regime like in China, or a republic, or a monarchy, or a theocratic system like Iran and Afghanistan? Or should we go back and live in an Australian totemistic Aboriginal structure, or an animist culture like PNG once was? Let me take this a bit further. Many have overlooked in the mix of available social constructs the concept of theocratic sovereignty as distinct from theocratic governance. Let me explain what I mean. Theocratic governance exists where one person or a group of people rules in the name of a deity or a god, or multiple deities or gods. Now this form of governance tends to be problematic because, as we know, rule by divine decree is not something humans do particularly well, especially when the dictates of the theocracy are imposed on the governed without their consent. They often become characterised as oppressive, dictatorial, or even corrupt in some circumstances. Theocratic sovereignty, on the other hand, is very different. It is the assumption that a sovereignty exists outside of ourselves and yet informs by revelation how we should live as created beings by the design of a creator, whom we understand to be God, who is the sovereign over all creation, which includes being sovereign over all nation-state constructs. Now that's a mouthful, and some will reject outright my proposition of an absolute sovereignty that I describe. But I would argue that many of our world conflicts would be resolved if theocratic sovereignty was recognised to exist above all nation-state constructs. It would mean these fragile constructs of nationhood, while mostly having day-to-day legitimacy in many countries, would function or exist with very different motivations. My argument goes like this. If we are prepared to acknowledge there is such a being as God, it follows that he is probably knowable. And if he is knowable, then how does knowing him impact us who are living in these temporal, fragile nation-state constructs? Now let me give you three illustrations of how theocratic sovereignty presents in our contemporary experience. First, the recently elected US Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, when being interviewed by Sean Hannity of Fox, said, "Someone asked me today, what does Mike Johnson think about any issue under the sun?" Now you might not realise this, but that was a loaded question from his critics. But listen to his response. He said, "Well, go pick up a Bible off your shelf and read it. That's my worldview. That's what I believe." But note what he also said. But there's one thing to keep in mind. Everyone comes to the House of Representatives with deep personal convictions, but not all personal convictions are going to become law. Now that, I suggest, is how a view of theocratic sovereignty is expressed in this fluid space of what we understand to be nation-state constructs. Johnson's worldview of theocratic sovereignty will inform his deliberations moving forward. The second example is our own Commonwealth of Australia Constitution Act of 1901. The preamble takes a not dissimilar position to Johnson when it says, whereas the people of the various states, humbly relying on the blessing of Almighty God, have agreed. Now that is a statement of theocratic sovereignty. It reflects our founding fathers' belief that as a fluid nation construct, we exist and we govern under a greater recognised sovereign head. Most Australians are unaware of the significance of that preamble. The third example is from the Torres Strait Islands, to the north of us. On the 1st of July each year, they celebrate the coming of the light, commemorating the time back in 1871 when missionaries introduced them to Christianity and they embraced that worldview as a guiding principle for living. And most of us are unaware of that annual celebration. I would suggest that if we are willing to accept this view of theocratic sovereignty, then our nation-state constructs, in whatever form they present, will take on a whole new modality. Even the construct of Aboriginal nationhood itself would be re-evaluated in all of its current presenting forms. Now, I trust you have found this opinion piece helpful, and I look forward to catching up with you another time. Thanks for watching. Bye.